You're watching The Ready Writer, a show where I get to speak to writers of all different genres, mediums, and experiences. The Ready Writer. Are you ready? Hi, I'm your host, Casey Bell, and you're watching another episode of The Ready Writer. Thank you for joining in. Today's guest is Dorothy Husen. She is the author of Transgenerational Trauma, where she discusses her past trauma in childhood, and she also talks about how journaling was not only therapeutic for her, but caused her to write her first book. Let's take a listen. So, first question, did you always aspire to be an author, or is this something that just kind of happened without you even knowing it was going to happen?
Yeah, it definitely happened without me knowing it was going to happen. It happened much later, in life. Actually, it coincided with my healing journey, which is what the book is about. So it was just a therapeutic process, really, for me as I started to heal from post-traumatic stress disorder from childhood trauma that I didn't know I had.
Okay. Would you say that was the motivation to actually publish the book? The
Yeah, the
the therapy?
publishing Yeah, the publishing came later, the first couple of years because it took me 3 years. So the first couple of years, I was just writing for like therapeutically, just like it's kind of like journaling. I put like my whole life's story into this really long book that nobody would ever really want to read. But then when my editor, she's a friend of mine, and so she said, look, you can publish it now. Anybody can self-publish, but you have to think about, do you want people to read it? And I was like, well, yeah, I do. She said, well, then you have to you have to cut it down and edit it and write it for the people who are going to read it. And so that's when I started thinking more about the publishing part of it. And then I did go with the hybrid. I self-publish, but I also used authority publishing. So they're like on the book, it's published by authority publishing.
Okay.
So, but it's a hybrid. So I paid them. They didn't pay
Right.
me.
Right.
I paid them. Yeah.
Awesome. So I see it there in the background, transgenerational trauma.
Yeah.
So it kind of give us an explanation or a summary or synopsis of what this is about and again why you wrote it.
It's my healing journey from post-traumatic stress disorder that so I didn't even know that I had post-traumatic stress disorder because I had thought I had forgotten it. I dealt with it. I used spiritual practices to tell myself that my past is forgiven, and that bad feeling that I had from when I thought about it, I I mis I misunderstood that bad feeling as sin. So, but it was actually shame from the trauma. So I didn't really deal with it. I just kept asking for forgiveness of my sins, and then it just stayed and grew, and the symptoms of dissociation kept increasing until later in life. And then I ended up going to therapy, and I was diagnosed, and I couldn't talk about it at first. And but that's when I started writing, because I could write what I couldn't talk about. So that's when I started writing. And then so once I started getting treatment and I started to feel better, I started to realize like my life started to make sense in a way that it never did before. Like, oh, that's why I was so quiet. That's why I couldn't handle problems. That's why, I feel so disconnected from people. That's why I feel so disconnected from my children. And so I started understanding and learning about like my mom's trauma, like, what happened to her, how it affected me, and then how what happened to me affected my daughter and my son. And that's what the book links up. It links up these connections between what happened to my mom and how she dealt with it, and then how her trauma affected how she raised me, and how she wasn't able to help me deal with the sexual abuse that I underwent, and then how what happened to me affected how I raised my kids. And the big problem was I just wasn't able to connect emotionally with them, and my mom wasn't able to connect emotionally with me. And that's the story. So the book is laid out in just like capsulated stories that teach a lesson about trauma and how to heal from trauma. And then at the end of each chapter, there's an exercise on what you can do, like slow, deep breathing, journaling, different visualization kind of meditations, and or just like writing a letter, to your kids, or talking to your parents about what happened to them and what their childhood was like. And that's really helpful to understand your personal history of trauma, because I don't think anybody, everybody has their story, everybody
Mhm.
has their traumas.
So,
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, the traumas that are just the injuries, the psychological injuries from things that happened to us. And then if we don't recover from them, it turns into post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right. So, either before, during, or after the publishing of this book, were you able to talk to your mother and your children, and have you been able to resolve or come to a resolution, or working on a resolution of between your relationships?
Yeah, it's in my book. You'll have to read my book. But yes, I did. Yeah, I wrote about that as well, of repairing the relationship between my mom and I. She's passed away now, but
Okay.
we did come into a better relationship before she passed away, the last 2 years of her life. And then my kids, we're still working on it, but much better now. And I wrote a letter to them, and I put it in my book. And then my daughter wrote a letter back to me, and that's in my book as well. And a lot of people tell me that's the part of the book that really, um, gets their heartstrings and they get them emotional.
So that would be the next question. How has the response been from the readers? And have you've heard them share their testimony or their stories, and how your book has helped them?
Yeah, it's been really gratifying, and I'm so happy, because that's why I wrote it the way I wrote it, because I wanted to be able to help people. I wanted people to be able to relate to it, so that they could heal their own traumas and heal their own relationships with their parents and children. And I've gotten a lot of great feedback. It's been really gratifying. And I also just found out my book won an award, a silver medal award from the um, Nonfiction Authors Association. So I was really proud about that. But yeah,
Amazing.
I've gotten good response. One of the things that everybody says is they couldn't put it down. Like they said, it's like reads like a novel, and I'm really happy about that, because I worked really hard on um, writing it so that it's enjoyable to read. I didn't want people to pick it up and read halfway through and put it on the shelf and become disinterested in it. So I followed the suggestion or the style of Lisa Crone, who wrote Wired for Story. Have you heard of that book?
No.
Wired for Story. She's a writer, and she writes about writing. And so she, in her book, she talks about the emotional rail. Like, if you want people to read your book, you have to keep that emotional rail throughout each chapter, going from chapter to chapter, to get people emotionally connected to your story and what they're reading. And so that was really helpful for me to, because when I'm writing, a lot of times I'm just like stating facts. I'm just, and at first that's how it is. I'm just like stating the facts. This is what happened. But then people don't really care about that. What they want to know is like, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What's going on inside of me? What are my fears? What am I ashamed about? And so that's what took so long, really, to get it into the words. But
So
that's also what people tell me the most. Like, I really could not put it down. Like, it's not that long. It's 150 pages long. So some people tell me, like, I read it in 1 day or 2 days. It's a quick read.
good. So let's talk about the writing and publishing process. So you said you originally were kind of just writing journals, and when you realized you had to publish it, you had to remove a lot. And so first talk about, how did you decide what needed to stay, what needed to go? Let's first talk about that. So how did you decide what
Yeah.
stayed and what stayed, what left?
I had help from Kelly Notaris. She wrote a book called The Book You Were Born to Write, and I went on a retreat. So she had a retreat, and it was 5 days. And during those 5 days, we worked on outlines. So that's where I started figuring out what needed to go. Most of it was what needed to go, and I needed to start focusing on the way her outline was set up. It's, you pick a story that teaches that lesson that I was talking about earlier, and then an exercise, because I wrote what's called a teaching memoir. And it's different from a memoir, and it's different from a self-help book. It's a combination of teaching and my story. So there's a specific outline that I had to follow that she provided. She provides these outlines for everybody to work on whatever kind of book they're writing. And then I followed that outline, and I had to just pick certain stories. So I picked a story, of course, my trauma. That's what I started out with. And then I went into my mom's story. I went into my dad's story, and then my growing up, my adolescence, when my family converted to Christianity when I was a young teenager, and it was a big event in our family. So I wrote a lot about that, and that had a lot to do with how I developed emotionally. And then I went into the relationship when I got married, and then my kids, and then my mom moved in with me, when she was older. And so that's like, I just had to pick specific stories that encapsulated the essence of that relationship and how my trauma was affected that relationship. and then how I healed myself, and then how that relationship healed. So that's kind of the outline of the book. And it was a lot of cutting, a lot of like, yeah, that was mainly cutting for me, and getting clear, like clear on the message.
And what about your publishing process, being that you really didn't have any knowledge on how to publish? What was the process like, and what were some things that kind of shocked you about the process you weren't really aware you had to do or had to know?
Well, I glad I hired a publisher, because I don't think I could have, I guess I could have done it on my own, but I don't think I would have had the product, the book that I have today, because they know so much about like the cover and the title, and they had me change my title. And I had a designer, cover designer, a graphic designer do the cover, and then they also did the edits, the copy edits, and made some suggestions about some changes. I don't really know the details, because they took care of it, and I'm really glad they did, because
How
that's
did you
not.
find them?
My friend who's an editor, she said, she suggested them. They're Authority Publishing. My hair's like looking weird. Yeah, she suggested them, and they had a hybrid, like you can self-publish, we'll help you do it. And then they also had, I think they have like, I think that's what they focus on, really. There's a lot of people right now that are wanting to self-publish their book, but
Yeah.
it's difficult. It's really hard to do it on your own, especially if you want, a good quality book. I think that's my opinion. I'm really glad I used them.
I
Yeah.
would definitely say so, to get help. So now that you have your book out there and you are now an author, something you didn't think you were ever going to be, is there anything you're learning along the way that you might say, I might want to write another one?
Yeah, definitely have the writing bug. I think getting it published, and also that feedback that I'm getting from people, how they're really enjoying it, and then the award, and definitely have the writing bug now. I'm still journaling every day, so I think it might come into another like workbook to accompany this book, because I'm a therapist, and a coach, a mind body coach. So I have my own technique of what I call reparenting yourself,
Okay.
parenting yourself
Yes.
securely. And I think that's what's coming together right now. It'll be a while though, but I'm definitely still writing, and I'm pretty sure it's probably going to be a workbook to accompany this book, because it would be the natural progression. There's already exercises in my book at the end of each chapter, and so I'll just expand on that.
I definitely think the reparenting yourself is a wonderful idea. I'm actually in the process of doing that myself.
Really?
Because not I mean, when you're not raised to know something and then you don't research it, it's difficult for you to teach your children. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, not all parents know certain things. And so when you come to that conclusion, you can either complain and, oh, woe is me, or you can just learn it yourself and teach yourself. And so there's a lot
Yeah.
of things I've been teaching myself, and there are days where I have to literally talk to myself like I'm a child, like, you're not going to
Mm-hmm.
do that today,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to behave yourself, blah, blah, blah. But I definitely think, especially in America, people need to really reparent themselves. And yes, that's the way you grew up. It was wrong. Get over it. it's now time to learn something new. And
Mm-hmm.
I definitely think that's a wonderful idea. And I truly hope once you get it all, ready, that you decide to put that in a book, because we definitely need it. We need to understand that sometimes you just got to reteach yourself what you didn't learn when you were a child. So
Yeah,
hope.
exactly. That's exactly it. And the beauty is you can do it. It's we didn't get those needs met when we were kids, but the good news is we can give it to ourselves. We
Right.
can reparent ourselves, and doesn't matter how old you are, it's going to help your kids if you have kids, because my kids were already grown when I reparented myself, and it still helped them. I'm still their mom, and I can
Right.
still pass on my healing to them.
Great. So I have two more questions for you. What advice would you give someone who either has started writing and is still back and forth, or someone who hasn't started writing and is thinking about it, but they haven't really made up in their, like, they made up in their mind they want a book, but they're making excuses as to why they can't do it. So what advice would you give them?
Well, there's so many great resources. For me, it really helped to have my friend who's an editor who encouraged me, like, that's you have a good story, Dorothy. Keep writing, and she'd tell me, well, write it again and write it again. And then um, I also went to that retreat. I went to a couple of writing retreats, and that was really encouraging because I was around other people who were, some people had already published a book, but most of us were just writing our first book, and being around other writers like that and being able to share and just sharing your struggles really, and be encouraged that way. And then there's also like writing groups online now, like you can sign up to get together with some people and share. There'll be like a little prompt that's shared, and we're going to write about this today, and then everybody writes. So writing is such an isolating kind of individual internal process that you have to go inward, and you have to do it yourself. But it helps if there's somebody next to you doing it as well. I mean, you're not like talking to each other, but just knowing like there's another person here who's writing and I'm writing, it just helps to have other people, I think, along on the in the process. So that's what I would suggest, is get connected to like a writing group.
Awesome. And the last question, if there's an author out there that inspires you that you would like to meet, and this is for pretend, so they can either be dead or alive, who would you like to sit down and have a conversation with?
Oh, um, I would like to meet Sue Grafton. I was such a fan of hers. She wrote the alphabet series. A is for alibi, B is, I forget what B is, C is for corpse. Anyway, she got all the way up to X, no, Y. She wrote Y is for yesterday, and then she passed away from cancer.
Yeah,
And I was such a fan of hers. I was so sad when she died. And yeah, and she never uh, wrote Z. And her writing was like, she didn't plan it out. She said, like, she just sit down and start writing each book, like when she, and so she just never got to, there's no outline or anything for
okay.
Z, the last book in her series. Have you heard of Sue Grafton?
I think someone else along the podcast has mentioned her, because I do remember someone saying about the A, and she didn't get the Z because she passed away. So I'm pretty sure someone else mentioned her
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just so sad. I mean, I really loved her writing.
And I'm pretty sure no one wants anyone else to write it for her.
I know. I mean, my husband and I talk about it, and he's like, "Why don't you write it?"
Well,
Just
that could
write
be
it.
a nice contest. Like, a bunch of people write it, and then the fans could decide who was the closest to what she would have done.
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea. Yeah.
Well, that is all the time we have for you today on The Ready Writer. I'm so glad you took the time to join us. I want to thank Dorothy for taking the time to share her journey and her story and her journey through writing and publishing. And of course, to you, the audience, as always, you know how much I thank you for taking the time to invest in CSB Television. Thank you. Have a great day.